Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to look to our tech team to confirm with me that we are all good to go. Tech team, can I get a confirmation?
Yes, we are good to go.
Okay, thank you. All right, good evening. Welcome everyone to our webinar tonight on the San Diego LOSSAN Rail Realignment Project. We want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us tonight. Tonight's webinar really is meant to be a recap. We are in the middle of a series of workshops that we've been engaging in to talk with you, with the community, about this really important project. We wanted to make sure that we gave those of you that were not able to maybe join us in person over the last couple of workshops a chance to sort of catch up, get to know all of the information that we shared in person at those workshops at the Del Mar Town Hall, so that we can all be on the same page as we head into the next two workshops, which are going to be really important, and we'll talk about those a little bit more later on in tonight's webinar. One thing I wanted to make clear, this is a webinar. There is going to be an opportunity for you to participate via polling questions that we will have in between certain slides throughout the presentation. And then at the end, we're going to have a moderated Q&A. So we'll ask once we reach the end of our presentation that you submit questions through the Q&A function. You'll see a button for that at the bottom of your screen, hopefully. We're going to collect all of those questions, and I'll be calling on folks from our project team to respond to those at the end of today's session. So I do encourage you to listen to what we have to share and then think about what other questions you might have so we can talk through those with you at the end of tonight. Okay, so before I go any further, let me tell you who I am and who we have with us joining us tonight for our webinar. My name is Robin Wapner. I am the Director of Public Affairs here at SANDAG, and I want to introduce my colleague Sharon Humphreys, who's joining us.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sharon Humphreys, and I am the Director of Engineering and Construction at SANDAG. Danny?
Good evening, I'm Danny Vey. I'm a rail planning program manager at SANDAG and the project manager for the San Diego LOSSAN Rail Realignment Project.
And Joe?
Oh, muted, Joe.
Good evening, I'm Joe O'Carroll. I'm with Mock McDonald as part of the HDR consultant team to SANDAG, and I'm the tunneling engineer, tunnel discipline lead for this project.
Thank you, Joe. We have other project team members that will be joining us later on for the Q&A section, and so they'll introduce themselves as they join us. I can see we have about 40 of you joining us from the public tonight, but we'd love to get to know a little bit more about you, so we're going to go ahead and start with our first polling question. If you can let us know, there we go, a little bit about yourself. You can go ahead and just pick one of those options, and we'll get a better sense as to who we're talking with tonight. We'll give it just a few more seconds. And when our tech team is ready, we can look at those results. Okay, it looks like about a third of our audience tonight are Del Mar residents. Welcome to Del Mar. But we also have another 10% of residents from throughout the county that are not living in the Del Mar area. So welcome to you as well. Lots of train riders, transit advocates. We've got someone from the Torrey Pines community as well, some elected representatives, as well as local business owners. So it's great, again, to see all of you. We really do appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. The next thing that we're curious to know is, how did you hear about this? You know, one of our primary objectives, one of our primary goals is really making sure that we're connecting with you. And so we're constantly seeking feedback on the best way to do that. If you can let us know, did you hear about this through email, social media, our website, or some other way, so we can make sure we continue to improve how we're reaching out to you. We'll just give that a few more seconds, and then we can pull up the results, please. And by far, I would say email. Half of you said email was how you found out about this. I'm hoping that's through our e-blast. But if you're not signed up for our distribution list, please look for that information at the end of today's webinar. So you can sign up and get updates from us through there. Also, a lot of folks learning about this through our SANDAG website, social media, and other sources. Okay, that's great. That's super helpful. Thanks for participating in that. Before I throw it over to Danny, who's going to get us started with a little bit of a project background and like, why are we even talking about doing this? I just wanted to reiterate sort of what our goals are for tonight's webinar. Again, this is a recap. You shouldn't be expecting to hear any new information. Really, we want to make sure that this was another opportunity for folks to hear, if they weren't able to join us in person, to join us virtually, hear all the same information that we've already shared at the last 2 workshops. Like I said, we also want to provide the opportunity to respond to questions. So we will have the moderated Q&A at the end of the webinar. And last, but not least, we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what's next. Like I said, we have 2 very important workshops coming up on November 6th and November 15th, where we're really going to dive into the conversation around alignments. We know that there's a lot of interest in that, understandably so. And so we're dedicating 2 workshops to really get into the meat of that with you. In addition, I do want to announce, and I'll share more details about this later on when we're talking about outreach in particular, that we have confirmed our community field office hours with the City of Del Mar. So starting in November and just, let's see, 12 days, we will be providing community field office hours essentially at the Del Mar Town Hall every Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then we're also going to be offering a virtual option for folks to connect with team members as well, starting in November. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on tonight. But again, want to recap, hopefully you hear everything that everyone else has already been able to see in the last 2 workshops. 2, a chance to submit questions. And 3, make sure you leave knowing what the next steps are. So with that, I will hand it over to Danny to walk us through the project background.
Thank you, Robin. We have a series of slides here. So I just wanted to recap some background information about the project. This slide here that you have in front of you is really recapping the LOSSAN corridor and the extent of it. So it's 351 miles long up to between San Diego and San Luis Obispo. And it's our only rail connection inside and outside of this region. If we didn't have this rail corridor, there would just be the only way to get in and out and up to Orange County would be on I-5 and more traffic, more trucks. And it's a strong ridership corridor. We have, in fact, 1 in 7 intercity passenger rails within the state of California begin or end their trips in San Diego County. And we have 3 of the top 10 intercity ridership stations are here in San Diego. And with rail corridors, it's a little bit different than highways. There's bottlenecks that exist here in San Diego and bottlenecks that exist in other parts of the corridor that limit schedules across Southern California. So the single track bottleneck in San Diego limits how much train service can be added all throughout Southern California. We're all connected. Go to the next slide. And we wanted to share a video because if a picture says 1,000 words, this is just exponential. But many of you in Del Mar are familiar with how close the train is to the edge of the bluffs here in Del Mar. And it's just inches away. This is vulnerable infrastructure. And this was a video from 2019 that was captured by and provided by the Scripps Institute of Oceanography that demonstrate a bluff collapse in Del Mar. And the rail corridor is right on top of those bluffs. This was a relatively minor bluff collapse, but this is a very common occurrence. We've seen up to 6 inches of erosion per year. And we've spent a lot of time and effort to stabilize the bluffs. And all these bluff stabilization efforts with piles and tiebacks and seawalls and drainage improvements, they're all temporary. These are, we do need to find a permanent solution to keep this rail corridor in operation for the long term. And the next slide shows a timeline over the last 20 years or so of the stabilization efforts. And what you can see is we're about to start phase 5. of Bluff Stabilization. And in total, we've had over $100 million of investments just to keep these bluffs stable and safe for trains to operate. But it's not the final, the ultimate permanent solution, which is to ultimately relocate the tracks. And the little icons you see on there, little yellow diamonds, represent bluff collapses that have occurred that have impacted rail service where the train is shut down. It makes it less reliable. And then we've also had emergency repairs in response to some of these bluff collapses. So this is a constant maintenance issue, and it takes a lot of resources to maintain the tracks on the bluffs. Next slide, please. And it's not just the bluffs. We have other vulnerabilities all across San Diego. We have old bridges that are a century old. And these are wooden trestles that are beyond their useful life. It takes a lot of money to keep them stable and safe. And we have plans to address all these vulnerabilities, and we have funding. And please announce that Barranquitas Lagoon was recently funded by the state of California to be replaced. So that bridge will be the next one to be replaced with modern, resilient, safe concrete bridges. And this is also, it's not just about keeping the rail corridor safe. We're investing in this corridor. The region has committed to investing in the LOSSAN corridor as part of the Transit Leap vision. So the 2021 regional plan identified the LOSSAN corridor as that long-term, fast, safe, reliable, and resilient rail corridor, that transit service that can connect from where people live to where people want to go conveniently and reliably. All these investments, so it's not just the realignment in Del Mar, it's all the other double tracks, the upgrades of the bridges, will result in surfliner train once per hour in each direction all throughout the day, and coaster trains up to 3 of them per hour. So in each direction. Ultimately getting to a travel time between Oceanside and downtown within 33 minutes. So that is the vision for 2050, and it's talking about zero emission trains. And it's really a fundamental change in what this rail corridor is, because if anybody rides a train now, there's large gaps in the service. I hear people say that it's not frequent enough. Well, this plan that we have, the Transit Leap vision, will address all of those. Next slide, please. And the San Diego realignment, we talked about the Del Mar Bluffs as the critical piece of infrastructure that we're trying to avoid. So this generally points to where it is on the southern end of the LOSSAN corridor, and it will extend north from basically the San Diego Lagoon all the way through Sorrento Valley to make that connection. And next, the project goals. So as we've discussed, we wanted to relocate the tracks away from the eroding coastal bluffs as our primary goal, as one of our primary goals. We also want to minimize the community impacts. We want to improve rail travel times and encourage ridership. We want to improve coastal access and improve the safety along the Del Mar Bluffs and through the Los Penasquitos Lagoon, and also preserve those wetlands in Los Penasquitos Lagoon. And I think we're going to pause here for another polling question. So
thanks, Danny. Yeah, I think it's important, right? We've put out what our goals are as we're thinking about this project, but we want to hear from all of you. What's important to you when you think about the realignment project? For some, you're really thinking about how can we move people and goods up the I-5 corridor on the rail corridor? Are you looking for a safe and reliable way to ride the train? Are you worried about climate change and how that's going to impact our ability to have a rail corridor, whether it's for freight or for people? Are you trying to get to LA faster on the train? Are you just tired of seeing all the work that we're doing to stabilize the bluffs and want us to move forward with a long-term solution? What really resonates with you when you think about this project? Let's see what our answers are. Let's see. Okay, it looks like more than a third of folks said faster travel by train was their top goal for the realignment project. And that's followed by building resistant infrastructure in response to climate change. Danny, are you surprised by any of those answers?
Am I surprised? I'm always surprised. I'm always curious. We're here to listen, and no, this is informative.
Yeah, this is helpful. So as we're thinking about the project, we can look at these goals and think about how do we incorporate these to make sure that we're hitting the needs of the folks that we're trying to serve. All right, thanks. I'll hand it back over to you, Danny.
All right, so let's continue on to the next slide here. Okay, so in August, we released and publicly posted our alternatives analysis, and in that analysis, we analyzed 5 different alignments, and those are shown here on this screen. And we identified whether there's tunnel locations or bridge structure, and identified where those portal locations are. And that's basically where a portal is essentially where the tunnel goes from above ground into below ground. So we have these 5 alignments that we studied, and we'll go on to the next slide. So we've presented that information previously, but we also heard from the public about this one as well. And we have a couple clicks on this one, I believe, but these 3, yeah, for this first one here. So these 3 portal options were first identified and presented, but we also heard that, hey, we want to keep these portals away from private property and away from homes. And can you look at other options for where these portals could go? And so we did that as part of this study, and that's shown on the report on our website. So we've identified, or we looked at what it would take to put a portal in the fairgrounds, or near the roundabout there on Jimmy Durante, or up by Crest Canyon over there on I-5. And we've studied that. That is in section 3.6 of the alternatives analysis, and definitely point you to the website to read more about all the pros and cons of those. And then we have one more click, and we have these other portal alternatives that we looked at and are continuing to look at in a lot more detail right now. These are on the north side there, which is on the left side, a portal location that would be basically under, basically away from private property and under the roadways of Jimmy Durante and Camino del Mar. So basically under that intersection, and that has different trade-offs, but addresses that comment that we've heard about keeping the portals away from private properties. And then on the south side, on the right side of the screen, we identified a portal location that's close to I-5. There's a knoll that's out by the pump station, right next to the I-5 corridor. And this alignment would continue a tunnel under Carmel Valley Road and come up in the knoll there, and have less surface impacts on the Los Penasquitos Lagoon, and keeps the portal farther away from the from homes. Okay, let's move along.
Danny, sorry, before we go to the next section, I have a question on the spaghetti. We like to call that the spaghetti map. So what does this actually mean? Because I've heard a lot of questions from folks that, like, we started off a few years ago with 5 lines on a map, and then we said, no, now there's only 2. And now we're coming back with this map that has many more than 2. What does this mean?
Yeah, no, so I appreciate that, Robin. Yeah, and I think I have that question a lot too, and I think it deserves an explanation. So back in 2020, we had those 5 alignments that we studied at a very high level. We had to do an alternatives analysis. That's the next step in helping identify all the features of what it would take to build a tunnel. What's the size of the tunnel? What will the portals be? And so we did that we have enough budget to do 2. So we selected 2 of the 5 to take to 10% plans. And then in response to that, we shared those results, and we heard that. And so we're actually going out and studying these further. Now, in November, we're going to be talking a lot more about additional alignments. And if there's other alignments that have been that are on this map, or they're not on this map that you think we should be studying, we want to hear about that next month as we're focused on the discussion on alignments. Just because we selected those 2 alignments to do that 10% design doesn't mean that those are the only 2 alignments that we're considering. Literally, we haven't made a decision on what alternatives and what alignments we're considering into the next phase, in the environmental phase. So that's going to be coming up as over the next few years as we study this project.
Thank you, Danny. I think that's really helpful. And just to be clear then, so when we're talking about alignments, that's the route, right? That's the purple, the different shades of purple lines. And then the circles you were talking about were portals. So
That's right.
What you just said, does that apply to the portal locations as well?
That's right. Yes.
Meaning we're studying all of these different options, and we also want to hear if there's other options we should be considering still.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've heard this question, why a tunnel? All of these alignments that we've shown include tunnels. And if we go to the next slide, there's really 2 main reasons why we've selected a tunnel. The first is topography. As you can see in this video, and if you're familiar with Del Mar, there's a pretty big hill. And for rail and trains, freight trains specifically, you've got a maximum grade of 2%. And there's really no way around the hill in Del Mar unless it's on the bluff. And we've talked about the issues with maintaining the tracks on the bluff. So really the only way to do that is to put it in an underground tunnel. And the other thing is surface impacts. Yeah, sure, we could probably build a large bridge or grade a big berm somewhere. But our goal of the project is to minimize impacts, minimize surface impacts. And the best way to do that is to put the infrastructure underground. That's why we're considering a tunnel in this environment. And we have a lot of work to do over the next several years as we continue to study these alignments and these alternatives. This is just a list of some of the technical studies that the technical team will be working on over the following years in advance from now until 2025. And next, I wanted to just pass it off to Joe, who will talk about tunneling.
Thank you, Danny. Good evening, and I'm pleased to have another opportunity to talk with everyone. At some of our previous meetings, we've heard a lot of good questions, but I know we have a much broader audience, I see from the polling earlier this evening. So in this brief presentation, I'll address a lot of the questions that we've heard to date, but characterize them in 4 broad categories. That's tunnel construction, tunnel ventilation, noise and vibration, and also the geotechnical considerations. So let's jump straight in. There are various methods of excavating a tunnel. The choice is usually driven primarily by the ground conditions, but also by the length, the size, the location, and the cost effectiveness. But here in Del Mar, our primary concern will be the safety and control of ground movement to avoid any settlement or other impacts to property, structures, utilities above the tunnel. And we know that this is best achieved using a tunnel boring machine. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about that. So think of the tunnel boring machine as an underground factory moving through the ground, building the tunnel behind it as it goes. Each step in the process is designed to support the ground in front of, around, and behind it, preventing any settlement occurring above the tunnel at the surface. The excavated ground passes through a rotating cutter head, as you see on the screen here, and into a chamber behind it, then extracted out through a screw conveyor. With the soil in the chamber and the screw conveyor working in harmony with the TBM advancing, you have a very controlled method of excavation. Additives are also injected into the cutter head to help condition the ground to always maintain that pressurized plug that you see in the screw conveyor. And this is what we call earth balanced pressurized TBM tunneling. The TBM has two main parts, the shield body and the backup system. The TBM is propelled forward using a system of thrust jacks. And the tunnel lining is built using precast concrete segments bolted together within the shield. The whole cycle is repeated ring after ring after ring. And when all this works smoothly, we expect to be able to build this tunnel at an average rate of about 300 feet of tunneling a week. Filling the gap behind the tunnel lining is really important. And we do that with a cement grout. This actually prevents any movement from occurring after the tunnel is built itself. We think of this as leaving no gap behind. Everything is solid and integral with the ground around the tunnel, eliminating any settlement being able to happen after the tunnel is complete. If we go to the next slide there. Thanks. So now that we know a little bit more about how the tunnel would be built, let's talk about the depth and why, as Danny mentioned, the topography here is really in our favor. Moving the alignment to the east means the natural topography results in a deep tunnel for the majority of the length. At a one-to-one scale, this might not appear as obvious at first sight. So to give it some context, I placed a scaled image of the Statue of Liberty above the tunnel. Lady Liberty stands at about just over 300 feet tall. Tunneling engineers like myself will tell you that the more cover we have above the tunnel, the less risk and the less impacts there will be. To put this in perspective, I spent 5 years as an engineer on the Channel Tunnel between England and France, and we had a similar amount of ground cover as we see here, but to the underside, the bottom of the ocean. So, we're very, very confident about the tunneling, this technology in the ground conditions that we have already begun to really understand in Del Mar. Next slide. At previous meetings and probably in the alternative analysis report that is on SANDAG's website, you will have heard or read about options that are being studied, and this includes terms such as a single bore and a twin bore tunnel. In a single bore, we'd have both tracks in one larger tunnel, separated by a dividing wall that acts as protection and for safe emergency egress and evacuation. When we refer to twin bore, as seen on the right-hand side here, it's about placing each track in a smaller tunnel connected by short pedestrian-type tunnels every 800 feet or so for purposes of, again, safe egress and evacuation. Egress from the tunnels will always be through the portals to the north and the south. And it's important to know that neither of these options that we're considering will require shafts going from the tunnel up to the surface on any of the alignments that Danny showed earlier in that alignment, alternatives alignment map. Next slide. So whether the selected option is a single bore or a twin bore solution, the size of the tunnel is well within the envelope of current TBM, tunnel boring machine technology. We've probably designed and built over 200 tunnels of this type just here in the US and around the world in the past decade or more. One such example, which is ongoing at the moment, is the Hampton Roads Tunnel in Virginia. This TBM is named Mary, actually, and it's tradition to name TBMs these days, and we usually invite children in the local elementary or middle schools to come up with a name. You know, we found that giving them a connection to the project, and they can go online and track progress is really valuable to you know, community understanding of what's going on beneath them. In the animation, you saw how the precast tunnel segments were used to build the tunnel lining. Here you see those particular segments for the Hampton Roads tunnel, actually, stored in a precast yard waiting to be delivered to site. What I'd like to point out in the picture on the left is that black band you see around the edge of each of the precast segments. That's a watertight gasket. It's a rubberized gasket that when these segments are bolted together and compressed together, that provides a very, very tight, watertight tunnel, not just for safety in terms of during construction for the people working in building the tunnel, but also you know, for the long term. So it doesn't leak, and that we make sure we don't have any impacts on the groundwater table, and which is really important, particularly at the south end of the tunnel in the lagoon. So this type of tunneling is also environmentally friendly in that respect. The picture on the right is they're looking at the back of the TBM, and as I mentioned, this is an underground factory, and the length of all the supporting equipment that we saw earlier is about 300 feet long. The yellow bagging at the top of the tunnel is used to push air to the TBM to ventilate it for during construction. Until the TBM exits the far end of the tunnel and then becomes naturally ventilated. When the tunnel is in operation, ventilation is provided by fans housed in concrete structures, as seen in the top picture, and these will be buried below the ground at the north and south portals. There are many ways to keep noise to within whatever the regulatory requirements will be that come out of the environmental impact reports. The use of baffles, as you see here in the photo on the below, are just one such method. This picture, in the bottom picture, was taken recently at the Regional Connector Tunneling Project, the Metro just completed in downtown Los Angeles. When the fans are on, and you're standing on the other side of these baffles, you can hardly hear them. In fact, Danny visited that project recently and experienced it for yourself, Danny, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
So next slide, please. During construction, the noise and vibration is also really important to us. And you know, both will be continuously monitored during tunneling. Monitors send real-time alerts to the construction supervisors, and if the limits that are set out in the environmental reports are exceeded, immediate action is taken. And it's really important to understand that it's our goal to absolutely stay within the environmental impact mitigations at all times during construction. But when we still carry, settlement monitoring, the ground movements I mentioned earlier at the start with the actual operation of the tunneling, but we do settlement monitoring at the surface throughout construction to verify that the operations of the tunnel, the construction of the tunnel, and the ground is behaving exactly the way we designed it to do so. So likewise with with operational noise and vibrations, when trains are running, we do calculations during the design to determine the vibration absorption of the ground and design the track to meet these requirements. We also carry out mock-up trials to verify our assumptions and the calculations before building any of the track bed works in the tunnel itself. So again, whatever the environmental impact report says is the criteria that we'll always be working to. So where are we now? Where are we today? Our team has a really good knowledge and understanding of the geology from previous experience, previous projects, and all the data that was carried out recently in Caltrain's work and upgrades there on the I-5. We will be starting very soon a phased investigation program that is intended to fill in some of the gaps and verify for us what we already know. As the project develops further, through further phases of site investigations will be performed to obtain more location-specific data that supports the design and the construction. For the most part, and as we start to build up a detailed geotechnical model of the entire project, we do have some flexibility as to where we do the boreholes that obtain this information, and at all times we keep the impacts to the community to a minimum during that investigation process also. So I think that kind of wraps it up from a tunneling perspective for this evening. Danny, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Yeah, I just really appreciate Joe and this consultant team that we have that is going to help us deliver this project and do the design. We have truly world-class expertise that is working on this project, and we have full confidence that that we can deliver this project, and we're not doing anything that's experimental. This is all within specific or meets all engineering standards, and is and basically we got world-class expertise on here. All right, now onto the timeline for this project. So we have so where we are, what phase we're in. So we are just beginning the preliminary engineering and environmental phase. So starting in 2023, this year, actually, since February, we've been conducting environmental surveys, and as well as analyzing possible track routes and alignments. And we're going to continue to do that throughout the end of this calendar year. And of course, public outreach is starting to ramp up and will continue to be robust throughout this environmental, in this preliminary engineering environmental phase. Starting next year, we will begin some of those environmental studies and really jump into the preliminary engineering, starting some of those initial environmental meetings. All those technical studies that I briefly touched on with that list, those are all going to be underway in 2024, ultimately leading up to 2025 draft environmental document. And then there'll be official comment period, and then by 2026 we expect to have a final environmental document up for consideration. Go to the next slide. And that gets us from 2023 to 2026. I should mention that we have funding from the state that fully funds this. We have $300 million that's going to fully fund this project from the preliminary engineering environmental phase all the way through final design. We are still looking for construction funds, but we have until 2028 when we're ready for construction to find that $3 to $4 billion it'll need to actually construct this project. We have about a 7-year construction period, and that puts us on track to open this project to the public and start running trains in 2035. And I think we wanted to go to a polling question, or is that
Yeah. So before we get into the FAQs and the Q&A section, we've shared a lot of information with you over the last 30 minutes or so. And so hopefully we've answered some of your questions. Hopefully we've talked about some of the goals that you said were important to you, but we also understand there's going to be things that raise additional questions, right? Or that you might have concerns with, and we want to know what those are. So if we can just ask you one more time to answer a question, we want to hear, what potential issues are you most concerned about now that you've heard everything we had to share tonight? Some of the options that we have for you are construction traffic or construction road closures, any disruptions to rail travel if you take the train while we're constructing the project, what impacts might be to private property, or what sort of a vibration will be experienced as a result of tunneling, noise and vibration, where the portal locations might be, or any sort of effects on natural ecosystems. What's on your mind now? And again, we just want to use this. It's not like a formal survey or anything like that, but this just helps us know what are the things that we should be talking about, thinking about as we continue to engage on this project. Let's see what our answers are. Okay. We've got a lot of folks, almost a third of the folks, saying disruptions to rail travel during construction are their top concern. And then not surprisingly, I think, at least for me, second to the top is impacts to private property. And then we've also got some folks on construction traffic and the effect on natural ecosystems. Okay, Danny, I'm going to ask you again, does any of that surprise you, or is that pretty consistent with what we've been hearing?
No, I think it's a little bit more varied than I thought. I think that this is a different audience than I think we've had at some of our other meetings, so it's interesting to hear some other viewpoints. But yeah, certainly all of these are a concern. Just because it didn't score highest on this little informal non-scientific poll doesn't mean we're not concerned about them. So we understand that all these things are, all these issues and many more are of concern to many people. So
yeah, to that point, I know we get, one of the questions that we get a lot is, what are you doing with all this feedback? We've had these workshops, hundreds of people have come to the workshops recently. We've got a good group here with us tonight, and I know hundreds more are going to come talk to us in November. What are we doing with all of that? It all is part of the record. Danny has a project team that spends a lot of time reading through everything that's submitted to us. So at the past workshops, we had multiple ways for people to share their feedback, whether it was on a post-it as part of an interactive exercise, formal public comments written down. At our last meeting, we had verbal public comments, and all of that's being transcribed by a court reporter. Actually, we're anxiously awaiting receiving that so that we can take another look at what we heard that night. And our goal really is to capture all of that, post it, be as transparent as we can, so everyone gets to see and hear the same things that we are as we work together to really define what this project is going to be for the region. So with that in mind, maybe we will go ahead and move into some of that Q&A. Please, if you haven't already, put your questions into the Q&A box now. I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the most common questions that we've been getting, just to sort of warm us up and buy you some time as you put your questions in the chat function. So first up, Danny, I'm going to go to you. We're talking a lot about this project, but what's actually going on? What's the status?
Yep, thanks, Robin. So yeah, we recently completed the 2023 alternatives analysis, which is posted on our website. And that's really your best source for the work that we've done to date. And really recommend anybody that's interested about learning about the project to read that. And there's a technical appendix in there as well that identifies everything we've worked on to date. But what we're looking at going forward is, like I mentioned, there was these other alignments that we're looking at. And so in the next few months, we are definitely refining those. We're we're doing some engineering work and on bringing all these other alignments and these portal locations up to the same level of design, which is about like 10% as the alternatives analysis alignments. But we still have a long way to go. So we are just at the very beginning of the environmental phase. We'll officially kick that off next year, and also aim to have that 30% design so that we can inform everybody, including the decision makers that will consider the environmental process, about all the potential impacts, and also more about the design, right? So if we only have 10% design, that means we get 90% of the effort left to do, left to uncover. And so that's what we're going to be working on, advancing those preliminary designs, finding more information about this project, helping to define it, and help to evaluate between alternatives over the next few years. So we still have a long way to go. And as we've said before, we haven't made any decisions on any alignments.
Well, that's a nice segue to the next question that we see on this slide. I think it's interesting though, Danny, you reminded me of some feedback that I recall hearing at recent workshops. You know, I hear from some people that we're making decisions too quickly. And how do they get to weigh in on the process? And then I hear from others like, you're taking way too long. This has to get done. I want to know how it's going to impact me. When are you finally going to move forward with this project? And when are we going to know what it actually is? Sharon, we're going to welcome you back for that big question. What's the answer?
Unfortunately, these decisions are not made quickly, and they shouldn't be. So we expect that the preferred alternative will be formally selected by the board in 2026. And so that's a ways out. But it's really important because we need to take the time to collect the feedback from the public and other stakeholders. And after we do that, we'll identify the alternatives that need to go into the environmental review process. And we're going to be starting that in the early part of next year. So after completing all the environmental surveys and the analysis, we're going to prepare a draft environmental document in 2025 that will be available for review and comment. And as you can imagine, a lot of the information that we collect through the technical review process will guide the alignments. We might have to avoid a sensitive environmental resource, or there might be some other factor we need to take into consideration. So that's why we can't set the alignments early. So following the public comment period, a final environmental document will identify the preferred alternative, and that will be presented to the board for approval.
Thanks, Sharon. And so now that we know when a decision is going to be made, how are we going to know, when will we know if this impacts property? Will property be needed to be acquired as part of this project?
Yep, I'll take this one, Robin. So the project is still in the early planning phase, and we're just beginning the environmental review, the review process. So property rights outside of the existing railroad right-of-way may be required to relocate the tracks off the current alignment in the Mar Bluffs. However, it's really too soon to know that right now. But during this environmental review process, properties within the boundaries of the project and of each of the project alternatives will identify specifically which properties, if there are properties, and that will be fully disclosed during the environmental review phase. So over the next few years, we'll have answers to this. It's typically, right away, and the needs for how much space is refined and optimized based on the input and feedback we hear. So if we, like I've kind of mentioned already, right, when we're looking at these other portal options that are keeping the portals farther away from public homes, that's one of those first examples of how we're addressing and changing the project and refining the project to minimize those impacts. If the project does go outside of the public right-of-way, the acquisition process typically does not begin until the planning and the environmental clearance are fully completed and the alignment is selected. And so that's not until 2026. And that engineering work will identify all of the parcels and the types of property interests that are required to construct and operate this project.
Thanks, Danny. Joe, I'm going to call you back for this one. So I heard you talking about ventilation shafts when you were talking about the tunnel as part of your presentation. And I think you said there's not going to be any, but I do know in the past we've talked about the potential of that. Can you help us understand why we might be hearing different things?
Yeah, thanks. So, we did bring in some of the leading experts in fire life safety and ventilation during the alternatives analysis, recognizing, as you mentioned, I mean, what was studied before, and we're absolutely reassured that all the ventilation and the emergency egress for the tunnels here in Del Mar can be handled at the two portals, the north and south, and that there won't be any requirement for shafts going to the surface. As I mentioned, I worked on the Channel Tunnel, which was 12 miles under the English Channel between England and France, and many other subaqueous tunnels as well. So, you know, we're very familiar with how to design ventilation systems for tunnels that, you know, just physically could not have any access to the surface above them. So yeah, and there would, you know, long answer, but there will be no tunnel, no shafts going to the surface.
Based on the information we have right now.
Based on the information we have right now.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go ahead and take the last one. I've talked about this a little bit throughout the presentation, but of course, we've got a lot of interest in how is the community going to be involved in this project. And it's super important to us that that is an authentic relationship, an honest conversation that we're having with everyone who may be impacted and everyone who may benefit from this project across the San Diego region. And really, as our only rail connection to LA and the rest of the state, the country, there's widespread effects. And so we're making sure we're being as inclusive as possible when we're doing our outreach and moving through this project process. So if we can go to the next slide, I want to make sure that you all know the dates for the upcoming workshops that I've been mentioning. I'm just realizing we didn't put the times on those, but I do believe they're from 6 o'clock to 7:30 on November 6th and November 15th. Those are the two alignment workshops that we've been talking about tonight. Again, this is really where we're going to get into the conversation, the details on where those purple lines are currently being studied and where more purple lines should maybe be based on your feedback. We know there's a lot of interest on the I-5 alignment, something looking at the fairgrounds, and so we want to hear from everyone. Let us know what your questions and ideas are so that we can really do our due diligence and learn as much as we can while we move forward. In addition to those two workshops, we are starting our community field office, as I mentioned, in November, every Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that will be accompanied by virtual options as well. So it's one of our goals is really to be able to provide different modes for people to be able to engage with us. So you're going to be seeing us throughout this project using in-person outreach events, online virtual events like this, emails, interactive websites. We'll be sending out things in the mail, any way that we think that we can get in touch with you and offer you a meaningful way to participate. That's what we're going to try to do. So again, same thing. If you have any ideas on that, we always want to hear from you as well on the best way to talk and communicate with everyone. I just want to highlight that while our series of workshops will be concluding on November 15th for this current phase, we fully intend to continue that conversation with you into next spring. So just stay tuned. Like I said, please sign up for our e-blast so that you know any other upcoming events as soon as we schedule those, so that you know when you can join us. All right, so with that, hopefully I've given you enough time to submit your questions into the Q&A function. We can go ahead and take down the PowerPoint and let's start to have a little bit of dialogue. So I'm looking at our list of questions. Danny, I think I'm going to throw this first one to you. We had a question from Sean, and he's wondering, will the new bridges be double tracked?
Yes, the new bridges will be double tracked. So yeah, we didn't really hit on it that specifically, but there will be new bridges constructed depending on the alignment through Los Penasquitos Lagoon. Those will all be double tracked. Everything's gonna be double tracked, and by 2035, when this tunnel's this realignment project's expected to be complete, actually the entire LOSSAN corridor within San Diego County will be fully double tracked. This will be one of those last pieces, and that will definitely unlock the opportunity to add more train service more frequently, and also make the trains run much more reliably.
Okay, thank you. Next one, I think probably Danny, is also for you. Are any stations going to need to be relocated? Matt is wondering this.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's most likely not, but we don't know yet because we haven't determined an alignment. So One of the, it's not a full station, but one of the plans that we have is a platform, special events platform at the fairgrounds. And there are some of the alignments that we studied that would like put the portal in the fairground or something up there. We'd have to look at if we can still maintain that platform at the fairgrounds. And certainly if the alignment alignments that we ended up selecting extends either farther north of Solana Beach or farther south than Sorrento Valley, we'd have to look at those connections as well. But at most of the alignments that we've looked at so far do not cause us to have to rebuild or change location of stations.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give you a break. Joe, you're back up. So we got a question from Sheila, and she wants to know, okay, so we've been talking about the ventilation shafts, right? But I think a lot of people are interested in knowing, what about for emergency evacuations? Does there need to be like another tunnel next to the tunnel where the train is so that people can get out in case of an emergency?
Yeah, and a great question, Sheila, thank you. Now, if I take the single bore, the tracks in the large diameter single bore are separated by a concrete wall that has evacuation doors that open in an emergency, and that's all controlled from the control center. So we talk about the incident tunnel. People leave the incident tunnel and move to the non-incident tunnel for evacuation through those doors, and then are evacuated out through the portals at either end. In the twin bore scenario, when you have the two smaller tunnels, they're separated by about 1 tunnel diameter apart, and they're connected together with cross passages. So not a single additional tunnel, but what we call cross passages, which are short pedestrian connections from one tunnel to the next, where people then leave the incident tunnel and are evacuated out of the non-incident tunnel safely. I hope that answers the question, Robin, does it?
I think it does. Sheila, hopefully that answers it for you. Please let us know if not. Sharon or Danny, do you want to add anything? Nope. Okay, I'm going to ask a new member of our project team to go ahead and join us now. Lorenzo, please, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Lorenzo Garrido. I'm with HDR. I am the project manager for our consultant team. I am a licensed civil engineer. I have over 30 years experience in planning, design, and construction of projects, transportation projects, including rail. So the question, understand, is are there variations in geology between Camino del Mar and I-5? And the answer simply is yes. Based on our existing research, our understanding of the geology in the area, as well as referencing available geology maps, we understand there are variations, including silty clay type sand with some sand and cobbles to sandstone. So we have that understanding, but what we are also planning as part of our efforts is to conduct additional geotechnical investigations to confirm the specifics that we'll be encountering.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Okay, Danny, Sharon, we got several questions about cost-benefit analysis, and I know that this is another topic that we've been hearing a lot about. So can you tell us, just like break it down, what is a cost-benefit analysis? When do we do it? What does it include? What does it not include? Everything we need to know.
Well, I'll go ahead and start on that one. Typically, we call it a benefit cost analysis. It's a requirement by the U.S. Department of Transportation to receive grant funding for infrastructure projects. And it's a systematic process for identifying, quantifying, and comparing expected benefits and cost of an investment, action, or policy. And it takes into consideration things like safety benefits, travel time savings, vehicle operating costs, emission reduction, health benefits, improved comfort, noise pollution, reduced noise pollution, emergency service response time, reductions in stormwater runoff, reductions in operations and maintenance costs, reductions in damages or outages, impacts from improved resilience, and other considerations for the quality of life and benefits. So it's comprised of multiple components, into the economic analysis. It looks at the economic impact, such as job creation, financial analysis, revenue impacts, equity impacts, and of course takes into consideration cost. So really, I think the question is, so that's what kind of goes into a BCA, or benefit cost analysis. The question is, how do we make sure it's independent and forward-looking? Anything that we do is available to the public for scrutiny. Additionally, any CBA or BCA that we prepare would need to be reviewed and approved by the Department of the US DOT that is overseeing our work. And so we would welcome, any input that the community has on making sure that that is a fair and equitable process. And we are absolutely committed to providing that. And we'll do so when we have enough information to appropriately analyze all of those things that we talked about.
Danny, anything you'd like to add to that?
That was comprehensive. I was about to jump in, but I think Sharon covered pretty much everything.
I have another question on that. When we do a cost benefit analysis, do we look at different options in that, or that's an analysis of one option? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
It does make sense what you're asking. I think you can look at different alternatives and prepare a BCA for different alternatives.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in, Sharon, too. So like one of those technical studies that we have to look at in the environmental process is the economic impacts. Yeah, I don't know if maybe we'll call on one of our environmental folks on the call, experts, to kind of highlight what that entails. But we will, of all the alignments and alternatives that we'll be considering in the environmental phase, we have to also identify and disclose economic impacts as part of those.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right, Joe, we're bringing you back. We've got a lot of questions for you. I'm going to start off with one having to do with sea level. How far below sea level will the proposed tunnels be? Tate would like to know.
Yeah, great question. Probably relates to the slide that I showed with the alignment and the depth. We obviously at the north end, we tie into the Sandaquito Bridge, and that's part of the improvements that overall improvements that Danny mentioned, and that will be redesigned and built so that it accommodates a design flood level that takes into account the 100-year flood level that we know now, plus plus some extra that take into account predictions on sea level rise. So if you start at that point, and Danny also mentioned the maximum slope for heavy rail being 2%, then the track work will start to go down below that at 2%. So the actual depth at the deepest point anywhere on the alignment is very much dependent upon the length of the alignment that ultimately selected, because it's geometry. Irrespective of all of that, though, whether the alignment is set above these design flood levels or we provide protection at the tunnel portal, particularly at the north end, so that the tunnel itself is protected against flooding from future potential flooding or and sea level rise. So no stormwater or no flooding or seawater will ever enter the tunnel.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Before you go,
Yeah.
Mario has an idea that he wants to ask you about. He says he's been hearing of some Scandinavian countries that have been placing trains or roadways in tubes parallel to the coastline. Is placing a tube off the coast a possibility or more expensive than tunneling?
Yeah, another great question. As I think I mentioned at the beginning, there are many ways to both design and build tunnels. And what Mario, I believe, is referring to is what is called immersed tube tunneling, and that's basically sinking precast very, very, very large precast concrete segments onto the seabed, or and then connecting to them together to make this tube, whether it's for a highway or whether it's for rail. I don't think, and I just say, I think it's a completely different approach that has completely different environmental impacts. And of course, you've got to take into account the location and what's happening immediately, close to the shore as the seabed starts to drop off very quickly. So is it the right? No, I don't think at all. It will be much more expensive than what we're doing with a tunnel boring machine, taking into consideration the topography that I mentioned being in our favor. So between the two, definitely the bored tunnel deep under Del Mar would be hugely less impactful from an environmental perspective, and less expensive than what Mario was referring to. But a great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. So Danny, one of the goals that we talked about earlier tonight was faster travel time on the train. And so one of our participants would like to know, they're sharing, it takes about an hour right now to get from Santa Fe Depot in San Diego to Oceanside on the coaster. What do we think the duration of that journey is going to be with the tunnel?
Well, that's a great question. And as I presented in the slides, I think there was a vision that was communicated that talks about in 2050, the travel time getting reduced down to 33 minutes. Now, the tunnel is one piece of that, but it also requires investments across the rest of the corridor. So these are the complete double tracking of the corridor. There's the realignment in Del Mar, the realignment in Miramar under the UTC area, all together, and the next generation of equipment as well. So trains that can operate at faster speeds, can accelerate and decelerate much faster than our old diesel locomotives. With all those things in place by 2050, and that's what's in the vision, we can get that travel time down to 33 minutes.
Okay, and then this is a related question from someone else. They'd like to know, so let's say we speed it up. Have we started modeling to predict what ridership will look like if the speed increases due to the tunneling?
Yeah, and from modeling, I'm presuming this is about ridership projections. There's different types of modeling we've done. So we've done rail operations modeling to verify, which is basically, how can I describe this? Rail operations modeling is the basically what infrastructure you need to achieve the service levels you want. So with the double track and the curves and how frequently we can run trains. So that has been completed, and that's really informed the design of this project, and that's in the alternatives analysis. So that's been completed. If we're talking about ridership modeling, so like projecting like how many people we think are going to ride this in the future. So we have done some preliminary work with our regional plan, but it's also something that we're going to dig into a lot more clearly, because that's going to have that's going to inform our environmental document. So over the next 2 years, we'll have that specific, and we'll identify what that ridership is specific to the tunnel project rather than the corridor as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Yanni. So Sharon, we've been talking a lot about how much time it's going to take to get to this long-term solution. We have someone that wants to know, so what do we do in the meantime? I'm using their words. The trains going by on the bluffs now seem extremely dangerous as bluffs deteriorate, and also for people crossing on narrow bluffs. What happens from now until 2035 in terms of keeping everyone safe and still being able to use the trains or transit through the corridor?
So we've done a number of stabilization projects, putting up columns to the west of the train tracks and lagging between those columns, and that is keeping the train safe. And those have just been designed for a 30-year life. And so we've got some time because we've stabilized the bluffs. We also have another phase of bluff stabilization projects coming online shortly. So we've done a really good job keeping the train tracks safe. Seeing people crossing over those tracks is a little scary. We actually are going to be working on a safe crossing of the tracks, and that project is going to be starting probably within the next 6 months. And so that's how we're going to address safe crossing of the tracks in the interim. But yeah, everything that we can do to speed up this project, you know, and having people's support and making sure we get everybody's input to come up with the right project for the region is going to really help us deliver this project as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Sharon. Joe, I have a question for you from Stephen. He would like to know, what considerations are we making for earthquake risk, and how close will the tunneling be to the Rose Canyon fault line?
Sorry, I was just putting my video back on. Yep, no, we are aware. So I'm not going to be able to give you the proximity in feet to the Rose Canyon fault line. I'd have to double check that with one of our geotechnical engineers. Can definitely get back to you on that. But you know, with bored tunnels, we do and are able to accommodate fault crossings. We have one particular fault crossing for a very large tunnel up in the Bay Area at the moment. So, you know, once we get the characteristics and potential movements, that's taken into account in the actual design of the board of the tunnel itself.
Okay.
But I can get Stephen some data on the proximity and get back to you on that, Robin.
Thank you, Joe.
I do also want to share that for the Midcoast project, you know, it kind of goes right over the Rose Canyon Fault in areas, and all of the bridges that were designed for that alignment are designed to withstand earthquakes. So the science and the technical skill required to design to protect infrastructure from failure during an earthquake is pretty advanced, and we're bringing that that technical skill to this project as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do a quick time check. We have about 15 minutes. We might be able to get through all the questions, but if not, please do provide us with your contact information or send us your questions directly through an email that will show before we leave, so we can make sure we get back to everyone. But we'll keep going and hopefully we can get through them. Danny, I'm going to go to you next. Lisa has a question about our spaghetti map. So she's asking, in regards to all of the purple lines that we had on that map, and I'm paraphrasing, will you be able to discard some of those as not feasible from an engineering standpoint?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. At this point in the process, we're adding more lines to the map. We're not necessarily taking them off, but certainly we want to be judicious with how we spend our resources. We want to hear from everybody in November about all these different alignments. But when it comes to taking alignments and identifying particular alternatives that will be identified, there potentially could be a screening process that can narrow the range of alternatives that we would take into the environmental process. Now, that's going to be transparent. There's going to be public involvement in part of that. But in order to do 30% design on all the lines on the map, that's really just not an effective use of time and resources. So we need to identify that right range of alternatives to be taken forward to 30% and can be analyzed between alternatives on which ones and identify what the benefits and the impacts are. And I might want to ask one of our environmental folks if Tim or Eric want to chime in if I said anything that is inconsistent or have anything else to add.
Anyone else?
I'll chime in. No, Danny, you've got it. I mean, we need to identify a reasonable range of alternatives, and that's what we'll address in the environmental document. And so we really want the public input to help us figure that out. And we will go through a scoping process that will help you understand where we're going with the alternatives and what we're going to have in the environmental document.
And Eric, can you just introduce yourself so we all know who you are?
I'm Eric Lathers. I'm with Eric Lathers Consulting. I've been working in the right-of-way since about 1995, starting out on the Solana Beach Trench, which back then was known as the Loma Santa Fe Grade Separation Project. And I've been involved in all the LOSSAN projects, almost all of them up and down the corridor ever since. So, and I'm going to be the environmental task lead on the consultant side.
Thank you. Okay, Danny, I'm going to throw the next few to you. One, we'll look back, and the next two are going to be about looking forward. So you mentioned earlier how in 2020 we did some analysis, and now we've updated that here in 2023. I think this question's looking back at the 2021. They're asking what went into the weighting shared previously in that study, and how are the alignments going to be decided going forward?
Yes, thanks, Robin. So I think the question's related to the alternatives analysis, where we identified 5 alternatives and we selected 2 of those alternatives to take to 10%. And I just want to make it really clear that there was a criteria that was developed. It was developed by the project development team, which was made up of planners, engineers, technical experts from all the rail stakeholders. So it was like SANDAG and North County Transit District and Amtrak and BNSF, as well as several of our consultants to help us identify what those alignments are. But what I want to make clear, though, is that initial screening doesn't determine what alternatives or what range of alternatives we're going to be carrying forward into this next phase. So that we selected 2 alignments to help get a better idea of what this project is. And so we released that in the 2023 alternatives analysis. That's what you'll see in that report, but you also see all these additional lines that we're looking at and considering, and we want to hear more. So now that we have an idea of like what the size of the tunnels could potentially be and what the where those portals could go, and some of the other logistics at a 10% level, we have a much better picture to help us inform and make decisions on what we carry forward into the 30% alternatives.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, now let's look forward. So we have a question about what the plan is for electrification along the line. Will the tunnels and bridges be built to accommodate future electrification? Sean would like to know.
Yeah, that's another great question. So the state of California has made a commitment to transition rail in the state of California to zero emission. We're designing the facility to not preclude electrification, but we don't really have plans to do that. What we've seen with technology and in modern trends in rail equipment is that trains can operate with using either hydrogen or battery power. And in fact, the first hydrogen train is going to begin operations just up the road in San Bernardino on the Redlands line later this year. I think it's supposed to be arriving, and that's fully hydrogen powered train. So it's electric, zero emission, with no overhead wires. we will continue to work with the state. We're talking about the next generation of equipment after next generation of trains after these diesel trains are going to be retired. But by 2035, we have some time and technology will continue to advance that we're open. So if there's sections where there could be electrification, if there's all battery or if it's all hydrogen, we can accommodate whatever the industry goes toward.
Okay, and then we have a couple folks just wondering what may or may not be included in the project. So one person's asking if there's a potential for a possible station somewhere close to downtown Del Mar, and another one's asking about if there would be a realignment of tracks underneath UTC as part of this project.
Okay, so yeah, so far we haven't identified any stations within Del Mar, although I did mention the fairgrounds. This is a project that's been on the books for quite a long time. There's a platform at the fairgrounds that will be constructed as part of the San Dieguito double track project. That project is final design. We're waiting to get the last bit of funding to start construction. That project we anticipate, I mean, that's an important regional facility. There's a huge demand for ridership at the fairgrounds, and anybody that's tried to drive into Del Mar during a special event knows that there's got to be another way to get in there. So we have that. We don't have any other stations planned on this alignment in Del Mar. For Miramar, or the UTC area, so that is not part of this particular project, but from that corridor-wide plan and vision, we did consider that, and that's what influences and drives that travel time of 33 minutes. We need to have that Miramar tunnel that cuts that off to achieve cuts off the long detour around Miramar Hill to achieve that time. That project is in SANDAG's regional plan, but it's in the 2050 phase. So that one's going to come next. Our priority is with the Del Mar realignment, obviously because of the issues with the Bluffs.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give Danny a little bit of a break and go to Sharon to talk about funding. Who do we think is going to help us pay for this project? Who will be the main contributors? Will the freight rail companies or the U.S. military or those that use the corridor be asked to assist in funding?
Yes, they absolutely will. This is going to be an expensive project, and we have heard that BNSF has contributed some funding to other projects in other regions, and so we're certainly going to be partnering with BNSF, the military. We're going to be seeking grant funding for the project. There's a lot of grant funding available for intercity railroads, as well as infrastructure impacted by climate change, sea level rise, and many other grant funding opportunities. So we've been very successful at SANDAG in terms of getting grant funding brought to the region. I believe we're bringing in almost $3 for every dollar that we put in locally. But we also anticipate that we will have some local dollars and state dollars contributed as well.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Joe, I'm going to bring you back for a clarification question. We were asking you about sea levels and how deep the tunnels would go before. There you are, Joe. Okay. And so we got some clarification. I think the question really had more to do with, given the different topography of Del Mar, will the tunnel be significant under all of Del Mar or just part because the altitude varies significantly?
For the majority of Del Mar, it will be deep under current topographic levels. Again, that depends on the alignments. We're studying alignments. As we select the alignments, we'll know more. But it becomes more significant, I guess, at towards the North Portal, where the topography drops off steeply, and and obviously the tunnel is rising towards the surface again to, as I said, to connect with the San Dieguito bridge, which is the is really the pivot point there. So yeah, that would, I mean, yes, there will be more significant impacts to be studied at the portals of the, you know, but that again is very much dependent on the outcome of all the studies that that the team is doing at the moment to determine this alignment selection.
Okay, thank you. Danny, we've been hearing this question also. So long term, we move forward with the project, we move the tracks, what happens to the bluffs?
Oh, I love this question. That's which is, and the answer is we don't know yet. But I love the question because this is an opportunity to figure out what happens to the right of way once the tracks are gone. So this project, once it's complete, those tracks will be off those bluffs. And I think there's really a tremendous amount of opportunity to make something of that property. So part of this this work that we're going to be doing over the next several years, we'll be looking at a planning study to really identify sort of the legal requirements of that right of way and the ownership limitations, but also a visioning process for what it could be. Could it be we've heard a linear trail or park or bikeway, and also just think about the connections to the coast that could be made if the tracks aren't there. And it's not just along the bluffs, it's also in the area north of the bluffs and that currently divide Del Mar, and it's also the area in Los Penasquitos Lagoon. What happens to those tracks if we remove them off the berm and move them to a different location and through the middle of Los Penasquitos Lagoon? What could those be? So these are questions that we don't know the answer to. We want to have a we want to hear your feedback on what people think that should be, and we're going to do a planning process, a planning study specifically looking at this in the next for the next 2 years.
Thanks, Danny. We are just about at time now, so I'm going to go ahead and take the last question and ask Ryan if you can put up our slide with our contact information, please, while we do that. So the question was, will there be workshops in other parts of the region since this project is really a regional project? The answer to that is yes. We want to talk to everyone. This is a project of regional, state, and national significance, as we've been saying, and so we want to be able to get out and touch as many people as possible. If you are from a community or a neighborhood where you think there's enough interest to have us come and talk to you all, please just let us know and we're happy to work with you on that. Again, here is all of our contact information. I know that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions. We will be following up with you. Please feel free to reach out to us or come see us at the November 6th or the November 15th workshop or at our community field office every Tuesday starting in November. Thank you again so much for taking the time to join us tonight. We hope that you learned something new and stay in touch with us as we continue to move forward. Danny, Sharon, everyone, thanks so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
And thank you.
Thank you.